Welcome back, everybody, to the 8 Cube Circus. It's been a bit, but we are here and ready to talk again about Golden Gauntlet coming to you another World Championship Series this year, 2026. And with that, we had to get a special guest for this. So we're going to be talking to one of the people behind Golden Gauntlet and Game On Events, the people that run it. It's Guest Gaming. Guest, how are we doing?
Good, good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation because I get to do something that I typically don't get to do, which is talk numbers and talk like statistics and cards and really get like in a different nitty-gritty. And I know you're all the right bunch for that. So I'm excited for today.
All right, Zen, Denish, it's been a bit. How are we doing? We'll start with Denish.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back. I mean, I've been playing so much Foom recently. It's awesome. I I honestly love that card. That is pretty much the only thing that's been tying me down to Marvel Snap. I've kind of just been brushing off everything else. Like Magus, whatever, however you say the card name, is a card that I think I would be really interested in. I just haven't messed with it too much because I mean, you got to play Foom. It's so funny. What about you, Zen? What have you been up to?
Well, I think notoriously you've heard me complaining about the meta. You've heard me complaining. High Infinite is not fun to play in right now. And I mean, when we talk about it, like I haven't been geeking out about the game, but seeing like meta changes and then curating your kind of tournament experience by deck building is like really interesting, right? Because it's not like Snap Ladder, it's not like Conquest, and there's a lot of interesting things that we'll talk about because we've talked a lot about tournament prep before, right? And we're all in Pixel. We got the two how many winners? Two, three times. And I think we're gonna be scrimming and helping out. I don't know if we're all planning on participating, but I do know we'll be involved in those conversations, in those little group chats we got.
Yeah, the what's it called? The whole kind of Pixel family of alliances. We have the Golden Gauntlet 1 and 2 winners, Derek and Roram, as well as Golden Gauntlet Championship qualifiers 2 and 3 in the Electric Flame and Cougar. And one thing that I noticed, at least, that I'm excited to get into with all the stats is I was looking at them and it's very indicative of what the meta is and what the successful decks were. Like, almost always the champion stack is somewhere represented in the statistics. But before we get to all the nitty gritty in that, make sure to join up the Discord if this is your first time seeing us. We have some coaching sessions in the Discord as well as YouTube alerts for my channel, Snap Academy, and Twitch alerts for both Denish and Xenaid. That being said, let's get into Golden Gauntlet 2026. So, guest, I'll start with you because this is your main thing. What's different this time about the Golden Gauntlet World Championships this year? And how excited are you for what is to come starting on March 7th?
Yeah, I mean, it was very chaotic, obviously, last year because we didn't know how the community would receive an actual somewhat competitive showcase tournament. Like, we didn't know what was going to happen. And when the team and I presented this to Second Dinner, they were even hesitant at first too. So that's why the first one was just a standalone, like, proof of concept. Let's see how this does. And it was very well received. So we did a second individual one, and then they're like, all right, let's do we got a whole nother 6 months. So let's do, can you do one a month for the next few months? Yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. Let's go. And that's what led to them signing on to Golden Gauntlet. So Golden Gauntlet, we tried some things last year. We wanted to make sure we hit every possible market out there. We did different time zones and different start times, and we learned a lot from those experiences as well. And then now that we can say that it was a success, we're now looking to use it in 2026, really hone in the things that we've learned from last year and say things like, first off, I don't know if this has been announced yet, but if it is, it isn't. What I'm not sure, but it is. We're doing 4 qualifiers throughout the year this year. It's not going to be 3. We are going to do 4, and we are going to be doing different times versus last year. So some will be featuring, leaning more towards the East Coast of the United States. And then, of course, you go to the West Coast and there's the UK, et cetera. So we do try to bounce around similarly. The exact dates for future events, I don't want to spoil anything yet. That I know I will not spoil because we are working through a bunch of different things on the back end to make sure that we can give those dates accurately and not have to change anything along the path. So we know, and Second Dinner has committed with us officially that we are going to be doing the full series throughout the entire year. Who knows what else could happen? Because we did Snowball Showdown, for as a variation, one-off style event back in January. So you never know if those kinds of events could also come back this, throughout the middle of the year, not just during Winterverse style events. And the biggest thing I wanted to, if you're listening to a podcast like this, and you're probably familiar with Golden Gauntlet, the only thing I want to give the viewer and the listener a real heads up on is I personally, as the production manager, have heard your feedback. And I am doing everything I can to try to give you all a better production that has more gameplay in those live streams and less podcast, less conversation between the casters exclusively because in between rounds, because we wanted to do a little bit of both to introduce that to the community in the past. It was mixed received, so we're going to lean more towards gameplay this year and see how that gets received. So we're trying to give you more Golden Gauntlet forward facing so you can see the best, battle it out live on the official Marvel Snap channel. So who knows where this year is going to take us, because last year, for such a short period of time, it was crazy.
Yeah, I definitely think that Golden Gauntlet in 2026 is excited. There was a lot of small things needed to be ironed out. I know from the player perspective, I remember playing in the first few of the Golden Gauntlets, and a lot of it was okay. The rounds had taken forever because a lot of people weren't familiar with the top deck system, and it was really kind of difficult for everybody involved. I was talking and I kind of heard it was chaos in the first time, but as eventually with Worlds, and I know I participated in the KM Best tournament ran by a lot of those same people at Game On. It was a much smoother experience, and it is a lot of the time I heard it was people are now familiar with the system. So if last time one of the things that might have turned you off of Golden Gauntlet was it was just taking forever, all the rounds where it was a lot of downtime, that is definitely getting a lot better. And I'll give it to Zen next for some other comments on this.
Yeah, I think building the Marvel Snap competitive community is a very unique and very worthwhile experience to be a part of, because when you're talking about these tournament settings, it's you're interacting in a game where you don't really interact with it in a normal basis day by day. There's communities out there who are looking at these new cards, being hey, where is this gonna fit? Looking at the meta, predicting little patch changes and being ahead of the deck building creation. And there's a lot of interesting conversations to have on skill levels, snap timing. Even if you just engage in the game casually, you can participate in these conversations. There are people who come back to the game and do extremely well. There are people who come from other card games, and I believe they win. There's a lot of room for Marvel Snap to grow in the competitive space. So it's your favorite streamer, your favorite gameplay, or just names you see on ladder. I think it's a really unique opportunity to build the Snap community.
Yeah, I think it's cool too, because it's not even the same competitive community that normal ladder has. Those people are included, but there's also the people who don't play ladder because they find it time consuming, or at least don't grind it. There's so many people who I've talked to, because the players in the Golden Gauntlet all join the Discord, and then there's almost a general meeting area where you can talk to people. So many people there that I just haven't met before or haven't talked to, and they're not necessarily the highest ranked players, but they're pretty good, and they want to get better, and they enjoy the game. And I think it's great. Yeah, we're giving those people an outlet that isn't just kind of grind infinitely into the void and play the same people repeatedly. It's play in this new format. It's Conquest. It's completely different.
Yeah, I definitely think I've seen players that normally aren't on ladder that I recognize win it all. For example, I know at least 3 winners: Derek, Roram, and Cougar, who I either and one of them's on a different server than me, but is always ranked in like the top 5. And then Roram and Cougar, who I queue on ladder often. But then you're also looking at other players like the winner of the Snowball Showdown, Omalas, who I've only queued once on ladder. Electric Flame, who I haven't queued on ladder. Like these players are clearly like they're good at Snap, but you don't see them too often because they ladder might not be too advantageous for them. Maybe they're a better Conquest player because there is some different dynamics in Conquest with all the snapping. And I think Snowball Showdown really kind of showed how much of a difference like snapping on ladder versus snapping in Conquest can really be. Overall, I think I like the Golden Gauntlet format a little bit more, but in general, it's cool to see how much these two game modes differ. And necessarily, you might not be like ranked in the top 1K on ladder, have all this like previous history. You might not even be infinite, but you can still definitely have a really good time and even win a few games in Golden Gauntlet. I know somebody who had never like participated in competitive events before, and they just threw on and off into a Snowball Showdown. They felt they had a deck they were comfortable with, and they came off losing top 16 by a tiebreaker. Now, while that might be a bad feeling in the mouth, it goes to show really everybody can have a shot. It's a really like open competition.
Yeah, and that was the whole point of the creation of this, was to be a showcase of Marvel Snap in a different way. It was to say that yes, there are going to be those people who are really good on ladder, but it is a different set of skills to also play in a conquest style. And similarly, you might be on ladder. Like I think Omalis was the perfect example for your own reference, where you might have only queued up to them one time ever previously. But that also might just because maybe they don't play ladder very often. Not because they're not in your server, not because they're not at your skill level, but just you might see more active players on ladder in that circle, in that community, in that bubble for X period of time. But there's so many other players that maybe they only have 10 minutes a day to play casually, and they're just really, really good. So they can't climb and climb and climb out of the, they barely make infinite in week 4, and they're at rank, they're SPs at like 7,500. So you're never going to see them. But they've been playing card games for 35 years. And wow, they actually are really good in the games that they do get to play every season. So you never know who you're going to run into. And I'm really proud of the community that we've built with Golden Gauntlet, both from the administrative side as well as from the player side, because I know you all have seen it progressively from event 1 to now through the world final, especially last year. It has gotten almost automated with the community to be able to talk, answer questions, provide feedback. This obviously the systems, we're going to get better and better consistently. We have automations now automatically running in Discord, kind of like holding your hand along the way of, oh, you've never done this before. Here, click this link, follow this. Now do this. Like we've really tried to make it, for lack of a better term, as idiot proof as possible for anybody their very first time, because some people have never even had a Discord before a Golden Gauntlet. I can't tell you the amount of tickets that we have to help people with where they've never had Discord before. This is a new experience, and you never know what somebody's experience level is, but it doesn't erase the fact that they're all just as passionate about Snap as someone who's been playing since the beta. They clearly love it. They want to spend their Saturday playing it with a bunch of people online, talking about the game. Like this is what the community is trying to do. So even if you're not someone who's ranked in the top 100, this kind of event is not exclusive to just that. You can play all 6 Swiss rounds and lose all 6 Swiss rounds, even though you were knocked out by the second or third. Look, just keep playing. Have a good time. That is the whole point of the event. Showcase all gameplay for Marvel Snap. And then, hey, you know what? If you win some prizes too, hey, that's just a perk.
Yeah, and I do think, to touch on that a little bit, the team has been doing a tremendous job of improving it. It's gone so much more smoothly recently, and even on like the streaming side or the broadcasting side, it's just improved so much, getting more gameplay. There's new systems they use for the players that just make it so more of the matches are streamable. Just great job to the team all around. I don't think I've said it enough, to be honest. Smlz, do you want to start to transition into the numbers side of it? It's exciting.
All right, so it's time to get in the numbers here. So what I did was I took the data from every single Golden Gauntlet event ran last year, which was 6 of them, and I sorted them by two factors. First, I sorted them so that only cards with 50 or more kind of games played would count. So really, and ignore all the I ran Scarlet Witch in one deck and had a 89% win rate. It's going to be number one. None of that. We're only looking at cards that were used in multiple decks for multiple players, all of that. And then I sorted by win rate so that we could see what was kind of most important, because obviously all the Golden Gauntlets really cared about win rate and not really cube rate. So we're going to start with Golden Gauntlets 1 and 2. And one thing that I picked up on this massively was reallocating power specifically. So a lot of move and bounce cards were very, very prevalent in Golden Gauntlet 1. I mean, you can look at the top two: Doctor Strange, which is a movement card, and Toxin, which is a bouncing card. And Beast as well up there, Ghost Spider, Aranya, Iron Fist. All these cards that typically go in like move bounce and reallocating power, very, very strong. In Golden Gauntlet 2, it was a bit of a mix. You got a lot of, again, those moving cards, some copiers like Frigga particularly in there. A lot of the Frigga stuff was good, as you can see, like Human Torch, which was still a 1 cost at the time, all the way up at number 2. You have Dakin down there rounding out the top 20, but also cards like Arishem in there. And Arishem will appear again. It has been a very common theme in Golden Gauntlets. It has been, again, one of the strongest cards, and it ended up winning it all in Golden Gauntlet 2, came second place at the World Championships. Guest, I know you're really trying to get into these numbers. What mainly sticks out to you here, or is there any other statistics you'd like to bring up from the first two Golden Gauntlets?
I mean, it was so long ago, these individual events. So, my goodness, it's amazing thinking back. And when looking back at these, I think Arishem's a unique case in and of itself, because there was back and forth conversation about, is it good to let Arishem even in the Golden Gauntlet? And this has been a constant conversation and is regularly brought up by the community. And most of it is because of GG2, because it just was such an incredibly strong deck because of the energy ramp. And 6 months later, honestly, you can have just as much energy ramp for a lot less variance. And yes, there's a certain amount of variance that always can benefit you. And that's the benefit of Arishem just in general, where your opponent has no freaking idea what's going to hit the board at any given point, because guess what? Neither do you. You don't know what's going to happen, nevertheless. But I do think a certain amount of planned variance is something that seems to be more consistent. And we saw that start to rise in some of the later events, which we'll talk more about then. But at the time, Arishem pointed out that specifically variance is needed, plus the energy advantage was going to be a huge factor just to be able to create that different kind of variance because of it. So I really want to say, based on where we were 6 months ago to where we are today, move bounce, sure, of course. I remember the conversations. Move bounce was a top tier. You see it in the top 1,000 a lot style of deck. And you did see it progressively in different instances throughout the other Golden Gauntlets later on. But out of those first two, Arishem's probably the biggest notable piece that constantly gets brought up in both positive and negative light.
Yeah, and obviously these two Golden Gauntlets are also in the context of old tech cards. So
Yes.
this is, I think, indicative of what we're seeing here, with so many of these cards being so difficult to almost turn off, interact with, or delete. It's like your move cards, your bounce cards, obviously. I think another interesting thing is the Professor X being so high. But before I touch on that, I will say, I think regarding Arishem, and even we'll see Valentina a little bit in Golden Gauntlet 2, not just because of the Arishem deck, but it has a higher win rate than Arishem itself. We've touched on this before on the podcast, but this information asymmetry and conquest is always going to be strong. It's more so, is there an agent to harness it? More so, is Erisham good right now? Are you able to play V-Hand? Are you able to play decks that you can see your draw early and weaponize that as the information asymmetry? Things like that. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on Professor X, because that's certainly a card I know I wouldn't expect to be there, because I believe this is the nerfed Professor X.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, for Prof X, I think like people have their niche solutions, right? And when you're sorting by win rate, you always see those like rare cards show up. Prof X was in around 70 games, and I don't remember which deck had Prof X at that time, but ramping into like Airsham probably like was able to run it. But was there werewolf decks that would be running it, right? That would be like kind of the main place to put it now. You see werewolf, you see prowler stuff. Looking back at old context, I wonder how many incidents we're gonna run into. Because I believe around certain Golden Gauntlets, we had certain cards that created the blank incident. And I don't remember if it was Golden 1 or Golden Gauntlet 2. Smlz, you're the numbers guy, but do you remember the first card we had the incident about?
What are you referring to here?
Well, we had multiple incidents, so we're going back, right? We may have another incident coming into this Golden Gauntlet, but as we're building up towards it,
Oh, the
Mr. Fantastic First Steps incident.
and that is where we begin the Golden Gauntlet qualifiers. So, one thing that is not shown here is Fantastic First Steps, but Golden Gauntlet Qualifier 1 was heavily dominated by Fantastic First Steps. I don't have the just play rates on the slides right now on the visuals, but I can guarantee you that it was the most played card by a wide margin. It was way higher than the next played card. It was crazy. And yeah, I'll kick it off to guest first here. These were the first two World Championship qualifiers. What are you thinking here?
Mr. Fantastic First Steps was more than a card in that, where it appeared in almost 35% of decks. And for that level of an appearance rate, that's just absolutely insane. Like it was pushing 40%, if I remember correctly. And in addition, it had a super high win rate, and it needed to be addressed. I don't think they addressed it properly, but they addressed it, needless to say. I think something that was very notable in this specific meta of like GG Worlds 1 specifically was people had no idea truly what they wanted to do. There were a bunch of different decks that people were trying to figure out what's going to be the best way to do blank in this new competitive scene, because we've got a couple Golden Gauntlets under our belt. There's a new shiny toy with Mr. Fantastic. Okay, just throw that into every deck. Sure, that's fine. But outside of that, it just kind of felt like anything was possible to win. And that's partially what we wanted, was that consistency of feeling like, you know, a lot of people want to play something good, but this is the old tech. So that's why the second most important card second most prevalent card in that appearance rate for GG1 was Shang-Chi. And that was the old Shang-Chi, because that was the catch-all. And we had that version for so long, and it was so important that we're like, oh, yes, we have to have, everybody's got to play Shang-Chi too. And that was also in like 30-something% of decks. And it's just weird thinking about how wide the field was. And then as we progress, and you'll see it throughout the statistics too, as we progress, you see the pools of popular decks get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Right. And it's a good note to talk about the old tech meta to really see like what meta are we going into now with the new Golden Gauntlet, and where is tech's place? Because you're not going to see Shang-Chi, right? You're not going to see these smaller deck building decisions that play out big and help you win big, help you play against the field. If you've been playing ladder recently, you know it's rock, paper, scissors, shall lao. Like, and I think people aren't going to be ready because ladder's been more matchup dependent than kind of skill decision making dependent, where it's just like, I can't deal with this. I don't have the card for this. But when you're in Conquest, you got to push through, right? That's why Airsham sees such a big rate. You can't just concede because Xiao Lao on 6, things like that. They're not going to be present when you're in that must win, like 10 cube Conquest match, right? So it really pushes you to like know things like hand read. There's so much skill expression, and now it's less about the tech card, but who can make the most out of their bad matchups, because really you will face a bad matchup in the spread of maybe like you're playing 7-8 players.
Yeah, and I do think that deck building portion of it is so interesting just to look at. At least I've obviously spent a lot of time on the Hella side of it, trying to fix it for different matchups and things like that into different metas. But all kinds of decks, I think, can make these like micro adjustments. Supergiant, for example, is really good at it. Supergiant can kind of throw things in and out to fit anything, because Supergiant is just such a disgusting card that it'll already just clear half the matchups, and so now you can kind of just maneuver yourself to beat the rest of them. Another one that I think people have started to mess with a little bit is negative. Negative, I'll just see suddenly start running Shang, and it's like, okay, what are you running Shang for? Oh, look, everyone's playing, I don't know, Star Lord, for example. Negative still isn't the best deck, but you have an answer for it. And so these tournament ready decks are going to have these little curveball cards that in a lot of matchups don't make sense. But Shang-Chi, for example, in a lot of matchups do make sense, especially at the time, because people are just trying to get points, right? And so I think that is a very cool part of the prep process that maybe not everyone sees, because a lot of people just kind of bring either net decks or whatever everyone else is bringing. It's a cool part to look at.
Yeah, so Denish touched on Supergiant, and I think this was when this qualifier specifically is when Supergiant really started to establish herself as kind of a mainstay of these Golden Gauntlets, and we're gonna see more in a later qualifier where Supergiant was, in my opinion, just like the best deck, and actually a deck that countered Supergiant ended up winning it all. But really, I want to point out that we're gonna look at the top 10 most played cards in this qualifier, which were Fantastic First Steps, Shang-Chi, Shadow King, Surge, Merlin, Killmonger, Gladiator, Red Guardian, 3-cost Negasonic, and Invisible Woman First Steps. And Shadow King was also a 2-cost at the time. So Supergiant instantly beats Invisible Woman First Steps. And that was the like most played archetype here. It's the most played like solid archetype card here. And also, cards like Fantastic First Steps can benefit from the information asymmetry in Supergiant. I know I played in this qualifier, and I played against Supergiant. Supergiant was a really dominant force here, and although it didn't win, what ended up winning was ongoing with an Electra in there to kill a Sunspot, which I think is still one of the best meta calls a champion has ever made in their deck. But in general, I think that when you're looking at Golden Gauntlet, like from this perspective, there's a few cards in here that crop up again and again. Supergiant is really the first one that I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about a couple more later, but is like this is really good into a conquest format because of how much it counters, and with those cards under the under Supergiant, it's a really good disruptive card. It beats a lot of the combo decks, and it still has enough points to kind of like beat its own stuff. Whether it be like a Dorkhawk Supergiant, a Ronin Supergiant, one we'll be talking about later, and I know Zen's a big fan of, Sauron Supergiant. There's a lot of different dynamics that kind of clash, and Supergiant's the first card that really illustrates all of them. And she did have to get nerfed because of this, down to a 4/6 after her buff, considering she wasn't played in the first 2 Golden Gauntlets. But yeah, I think that Supergiant's definitely an avenue that people are going to start looking towards in maybe this upcoming one.
Yeah, it's a silly little thing, but after the first two events, I remember posting it just a message on Twitter/X and saying, here are the cards that were not played in either event. And then the following OTA, it was like, well, based on the results of you all not playing any of these cards in the competitive scene, let's buff a bunch of them. And I've learned to be very selective in doing that now because it actually does hold a little bit of power when you look at the analytics of like play rates of certain cards. And I found it just oddly interesting that it took Golden Gauntlet to get certain cards to get like, here's an extra power, just, you know, because we feel bad. Here's a power because you're doing nothing. Here's this. Meanwhile, every day, I know we're all people that are basically on Untapped or your favorite, you know, Snap Fan, Marvel Snap Zone, whichever one you use, tracker system looking at numbers and statistics and play rates and stuff. It's like all of these numbers are all here. Like we look at these all the time. Why are these cards not getting better and better and better?
Your words hold a little more weight with Second Dinner. I'll just put that out there because you should see how much High Ladder complain. High Ladder complains all the time. Like
Gamers
ooh,
complaining? No.
No, but it's
No.
bad. Cause like there are games out there like League, they'll balance for High Ladder, right? They'll balance for like their top 10. They'll be like, yeah, this card, like no one knows what to do with it. We're gonna leave it strong because when we bring it down to Gen Pop, like no one knows how to use it. Human Torch being the example, Batroc being the example, but those cards aren't always the ones that find success. Again, variance is a huge thing when it comes to these Golden Gauntlets, but there is like, you know, argument for cards that aren't getting played to get buffed and cards that are overplayed to get nerfed. Like all of us, like there was a chat with the whole plot get Juggernaut nerfed. It was like this card needs to be nerfed, and we were like OTA after OTA after OTA, like Golden Gauntlet. It's who has Jug? Guess what we're doing on turn 6, Juggernaut, like stuff like that. And who knows? Because if this Golden Gauntlet comes, and I'm just gonna put a spoiler out there. Xiao Lao turn 6, baby! Like, if that is every game on the cast, maybe Second Dinner is like, I don't know if we like this play pattern. Xiao Lao turn 6, dang, we lost that 50-50. Ah, tough.
See, you're missing a key part to that is as said caster, it's not the excitement of Xiao Lao on turn 6. We all know it's the excitement of Maverick on turn 5. Come on now. You know that's the bigger play, right? But but I do want to say Q1 was the beginning of this very interesting conversational arc that also happened surrounding Shadow King. And we see this as we go into Q2 as well, because it started off at, like, it was a popular card, Shadow King. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't, you know, it was a top 3 card. Great. But as you go through more and more, like you get to later and later events, it was the only card that rose as high as it did in play rate over the course of the 4 Golden Gauntlet events. And this was just the beginning because they were saying, well, okay, we have Shang-Chi. That captures everything. We don't have to worry about Shadow King. Because Shadow King was like, but it's a 2 cost. Like, you could play both Shang and Shadow. I don't understand why we're not doing both. And people were still leaning heavily towards Shang-Chi, and both saw an increase going into Q2. But then after the Techpocalypse in Q3, complete transformation. And it's just like the beginning of that, like Shadow King villain storyline was from Q1 as we head to Q2, where discard, just classic discard, man.
Yeah, it's not techable. I mean that's the exact kind of deck that when everyone's running Shang-Chi, Shadow King, you need a Red Guardian, you don't have a Red Guardian, you lose. Or like you need a Fenris Wolf, you don't have a Fenris Wolf. It's these decks that die to these random like Mobius. Negative probably would have done very well as well, unless I'm forgetting something. Or even like Hela, for example. There's a Magneto up there. I know what deck runs Magneto, and I don't think it's Scream. Like, it's not just necessarily straight discard, but more so, yeah, just these untechable decks. Because And I think it's also indicative of Q3 as well as even future Golden Gauntlets. Now that we're in this new era of Snap with the with the
The
with the
season
new tech
passes. Oh,
cards.
sorry. Oh,
Yeah, and the
those.
season
Yeah.
passes with the new tech cards where you can't run them all. So is it going to be decks that are untechable, or is it just going to be the biggest deck possible? Because like Xiaolao, for example, it's untechable and it's the biggest deck possible. So where once I think I know what's going to happen in the next Golden Gauntlet, but after that, I'm curious, is it going to turn into is it going to turn into who can run the most tech just to beat all the big dudes, or is it just going to stay who's going to run Xiaolao or whatever the next biggest card is? My gut says it's just going to be cram every tech card still, which I think will just be the Super Giant deck, but we'll see. What do you think?
What I've seen happen from every single event, no matter when it was, is there's this consistent pattern. And it started to happen with the qualifiers because they were in 4 straight months. So with the qualifiers, we had the event happen on the first Saturday after each season's new launch. So that way there's a couple of days for the new cards, and maybe you bring them in, maybe you don't, but you're still kind of playing into whatever that meta is. And you said it earlier too, a lot of people net deck and you don't know what's going to be played. But post, everybody and their sister ends up playing the winning deck in some capacity, way, shape, or form, which is one of the reasons that Second Dinner has developed putting the winner's deck also into an exclusive snap pack. And we're looking to do that again also throughout all of 2026 with these events too. And you're going to see it on ladder. People are going to play it and they're going to realize it is not the best thing to bring on ladder more often than not. It has been very rare, and the discard deck is probably the exception to this, where it is very rare that the winning deck makes sense and is as dominant on ladder. Because when you're prepping for these events, obviously, you're prepping for a very specific pool of people, right? It's just like you're playing up against a meta, and then you know it's a concentrated pool of that meta, so you're trying to tech for it. You talked about the Electra that was randomly in an ongoing deck, and everybody lost their mind, and they were like, oh yes, I have to throw that in right now, and everybody did. And then it wasn't good, and people were confused. And when you're, obviously, you all know, when you're building for a tournament event, take the principles of the decks that do well and apply them to ladder. Don't necessarily bring the decks that do well directly into ladder, because you're gonna have to adjust for a much wider variance of different decks that you're going to be playing against. So the catch-all cards like Super Giant, yeah, that makes more sense. Negasonic Teenage Warhead, another great catch-all card. You're playing a deck that takes priority, probably want to think about Negasonic Teenage Warhead. It's that kind of stuff you got to tweak and adjust depending on the meta. But when the discard deck won, insider information here, everybody in Second Dinner, everybody in Game On events were absolutely ecstatic. Like, we were beyond celebrating the fact that an incredibly free-to-play, easy access deck was able to take down this entire field of, new cards, crazy thinkers, longtime players, etc. And it's just about not necessarily the card difficulty, but it's more about how well do you know the ins and outs of what you're playing.
Yeah, the classic discard winning was kind of shocking to me, at least. So when I was seeing it unfolding and the bracket unfolding, and I honestly can't remember the semifinal of Classic Discard, but at least I'm going to go to the other one, which was Morgan Le Fay beating the Meta Tyrant move deck, which people were going nuts about. That really kind of was like, okay, something is going on here. Maybe the meta wasn't as closed as we thought. And one other thing that I do want to bring up, the top 10 most played in Qualifier 2. Listen to these cards. Shang-Chi, Merlin, Shadow King, Eliath, Surge, Mobius, Hood, Negasonic, Iron Patriot, Enchantress. There is a ton of tech cards. None of them tech for discard. Cosmic Ghost Rider was not out yet. Deafening Chord was not out yet. Red Guardian was further down the list.
No. Cosmic Ghost Rider was like the 15th most popular
Really?
card.
Oh, I must have missed that.
It was. It was there, but people weren't playing it like the way that you would expect, the volume in which you would expect to see it. No
People
way.
were really low.
Mr. Statistics, I'm gonna shove these back down your throat, man. But it's true though, and especially with that deck in particular, obviously you just play around it. Like, you know, you're gonna see a bunch of it. Just put it in the back line. Okay, Dracula's fine. Ta-da! Like,
yeah, so I must miss the CGR. But in general, a lot of the cards that were succeeding were stuff that's tough to tech against. The second most common like win con in the deck in terms of the statistics we have here sorted by win rate, Victoria Hand. Once again, another notoriously difficult deck to interact with because a lot of the power that's happening there happens in hand. And you don't see Gorgon anywhere near the top here. So one other thing, I'm going to flip it to Zen because he has an interesting spin on second Thunder being happy discard one for the free to play. But
yeah,
I also like when the free to play decks win because also more people feel like they have a shot. I saw a classic discard on ladder the next week so much. Everyone was playing these old decks that were tough to interact with. Yeah. So Zen, I'll flip it to you.
Yeah, well, you know, I love when the meta shifts according to certain decks being played at Golden Gauntlet, and I believe in Q3, Q4, that's when, or just Q3, that was one of our favorite decks won, right? It is the top winningest cards of Sauron, but also was it this not the winner being Cerebro 3?
No.
No, that was the world final. That was Zapgaze. We'll get to that next, but this was the
Cougar on Hydra Stomper with Cosmic Ghost Rider. One qualifier.
This was the beginning of Hydra Stomper and Batroc just starting to really begin to dominate because people were like, "Oh, this is good."
And we were spoiled with Roram versus Cougar, right?
Yeah.
This was that, and Sauron was very well played. Top played card, top win. It's a really big, skillful card, and I think the cool thing about Golden Gauntlet, people will cope. People will do what they want to with the decks that they want to, and it really is up for them to play or diff. It's really up for them to use their cards the best they can for every matchup because, like, we talk about the matchups as if it's like, oh, this deck beat this deck, but really it's also the players winning, right? And the players having masterful knowledge of how that deck wins, right? Like Morgan Le Fay just doesn't beat the move Tyrant if the Morgan Le Fay player doesn't know what they're doing. And I think, you know, with the deck spread here, Sauron being at the top, very skillful deck. Talking about other decks, what else was in this meta?
So it was a lot of Sauron Supergiant.
This was
and a lot of. This was when you made Sauron Supergiant, right, Zen?
Yeah, I made it. Well, you put a word after Sauron, and I made it. Like Sauron Patriot, Sauron Supergiant, Sauron. I mean, maybe Iron Man. You know, who knows? Like those decks were all tailored by me. But yeah, I think Supergiant standing the test of time is just turning off turn 5 prep is always gonna be very good. We don't talk about Nightmare, but you also see the Arishem cards showing itself. You see Thanos showing itself. You see Mockingbird showing itself, and the ever-present pillar of High Infinite, Move. If Move is dead, there are no High Infinite players. I'll say it. If there are Move fans, High Infinite is one of them. And I believe the top 10 cards for this meta still kind of show the tech cards showing the top, because honestly, when people don't know what to do and, you know, picking a deck is really hard, you go back to tech. You always go back to tech. That's why you go back to Arishem. Arishem is tech.
I think one of the really unique things also was that this was the post-Techpocalypse change, where we saw a lot of chaos all of a sudden hit the board because everyone went, wow, Shang-Chi was the most popular card in Q2, and then it just got nerfed into oblivion, and less than half of the amount of people that played it comparatively didn't bring it. And then you saw all of a sudden there wasn't really that much of a change of Shadow King because people were still leaning into 2-cost Shadow King as like the catch-all, as the potential, like, okay, this is good enough to deal with whatever you're going to present to us as this new meta. But Merlin is another card I think we should really talk about too, because Merlin has been surviving the test of time and is constantly in this 15 to 25% range of appearance and is really, really still dominating. Well, at least was still dominating. And during this meta as well, it still also had its relevance. But this was the moment where we had Hydra Stomper come through as the like, hey, this is the deck that's going to counter everything in the meta. Okay. But we never, I don't think, expected it to be actually starting to rewrite the meta as we now fast forward 5 months from when that happened. And here we are still whining and complaining about Batroc needing to still lose some power because, and I honestly attribute a lot of it to this specific event.
See, I think some of us might be surprised, but whenever a move deck comes to prominence, we know it will stay there for 6 months. Every move deck, and it's no one's fault. Move decks are hard to pilot, reallocating power where it needs to be, and honestly, they're a headache to play. Which is, even when you see Golden Gauntlet, like you'll see players like Sizer, you'll see really good players consistently. Hopefully, we get to see Iris in the next one. But maintaining the level of gameplay needed to maintain move expertise for like 7 hours is insane, especially when you're playing against tough players. Like after playing against, but after playing against someone you know on ladder who is a tough matchup, you're exhausted, and everyone's decision making seems to kind of be put to the test when you get to those top 16, those stream games. You're waiting, like it's really a test of resilience as well. Sometimes you might not know how to use Red Skull to beat Cerebro. Like there are things that you like you're tested for in these long days of playing.
I think we caught a little bit of shade there from Zen with the Red Skull comment. Was Cerebro at its peak yet in Qualifier 3? I know it didn't win, but that's probably because Red Skull was everywhere. Was it buffed? I don't remember.
Yeah, Cerebro was buffed in the summer. So it was in its current state of +3 at the time, but Xenaid convinced everybody to run Red Skull. He put his magic, Sauron dinosaur magic everywhere, and yeah, Cerebro was eradicated, and then once the Sauron supergiant kind of died, it really took over.
Yeah, I do think we can move on eventually, but obviously the reason that Sauron was so prominent is, like you said, the tech cards. It's just at that time you could fit exactly what you needed. It had the Red Skull by default, because I know on ladder at least Cerebro was still being very dominant, even if it wasn't so much in Golden Gauntlet, probably because it fell apart to Monster Island, or because I don't know, Red Skull everywhere. But you're able to run the Supergiant and like 2 other tech cards. Yeah, that's what it really was. I think it's interesting to look at where this was a situation where we went from last Golden Gauntlet, where it was everything all the time and people were just trying stuff, into this where it's now very set. Like, okay, we're not trying stuff anymore. We don't like the stuff people are doing. It's almost like the people that are deck building are reacting more so than not having anything to react to. And I think that is another way to look at it, because looking at a Sauron deck that's running Supergiant, there's probably a reason you're running the card Sauron, trying to like do something. In this case, it was for Red Skull as a tech card, but like you you can usually tell when there's some deck like Cerebro that just needs to be shut down just by looking at the point spread like this, for sure.
I think similarly too, like we think back to this meta where Sauron was able to keep up, right? Sauron had good stats And Zen, listen, I love you, but I'm gonna have to speak some truths here. Sauron, past tense, had the ability to keep up and had the ability to keep, get good stats. But we now live in a world where we have things like Chamber and Moondragon, and Dragon Lord, and a bunch of ramping and Fin Fang Foom, and it's just the value of the Sauron decks that were able to survive during the beginning of this new techpocalypse era no longer have the same oomph value, the same surprise value, the same extra piece of factored variance, because it was a very, generally for the most common players, a very scripted deck. And I love the fact that it was like able to be relevant for such a long time. And now we're constantly having to reassess and look at it and go, sorry, but.
Yeah, Sauron's not where its former glory was. I've been suggested to try some different decks. There was a beautiful card that came out, Nightmare, and it offers much more exciting variants that you can use. Why play Supergiant? But on a more serious note, with Sauron, it is like the policer of a fair metagame, right? It's like in a perfect world, if you're playing fair points, you should not be able to outpoint Sauron unless you have unfair combos, like chaining certain cards together, specific draw order. That is not the world we live in. The world we live in is the world where Nightcrawler is a 1-3 and Sauron is a 1-2, right? The scaling 2 8s, 2 9s are fighting, like Lizard doesn't keep up. Iron Patriot, hey, that's the card you use if you want to scam. Like, you inherently want to be playing unfair games where you can do something that your opponent cannot. And unfortunately, playing a 3-10 doesn't cut it anymore. Like, it truly does not.
All right, hear me out, Xenaid. I'm gonna fix Sauron right now, okay? All they gotta do is print Fing Fang Foom 2, and it's a 740 that has ongoing you're losing this lane. I fixed Sauron.
Right, and then we play Sauron Ereshkigal.
Yeah, to get the energy, for sure.
What if you nightmared it into a Fin Fang Foom?
That would be insane. But I think, speaking of the Sauron, right, it was a good answer to Cerebro, and I do think people hate Cerebro much more than any other player. The problem is you can't hate on Cerebro and be rewarded for it anymore. You think about Sauron's place in the metagame, we're in a much more tech-specific meta where the deck you choose dictates the tech shell you're allowed to play. Minus the evergreen card Guess Set, which is Shadow King, can be fit in a lot more decks. But you want some inherent value to your tech cards. Like for Shane, you want to have Fenris Wolf in your deck. For Killmonger, you ideally want to be a Destroy deck. If you're Enchantress, guess what deck you're playing? Sauron. If you're CGR, you want to be Ramp, you want to have some source of extra energy. There have just been shells that kind of support tech cards better. And the best tech cards are no longer the ones that we name when we think of tech cards, but they are our Lord and Savior Cosmo Juggernauts. Like, you want to have those proactive options, and you get that by doing points. You get that by chaining your early game plays together. I guess.
I think you talk about those chainings in particular, and it's something that we saw regularly. I mean, granted, there's always going to be the move players are the move players. They know their combos. They're going to be playing it in some variation of it in every event because it's just everything they play. But generally speaking, I think the evolution of move is also something to note throughout all of these events and how it even spreads into today's meta, where we went from classic, going even further back, if you want to go pre-GG, you look at like Silky Smooth was like the type of move that kind of had something to work with. Then real move started to make a comeback. Then move bounce started to move forward as the right combo. And then GG3, we had the Hydra Stomper move start to show up for the first time. And then all of a sudden, now there was this like contention between move bounce and these Hydra move decks. Like, where are these going to be fitting in the right certain metas? And by the time we got to the world final, all of a sudden, that's all you saw. The percentages for all of the move cards skyrocketed. And I do think it was mainly because people decided to finally invest into move even further during that moment, because that's when we got access to Spider-Punk. That's when we got access to Sparky. And it was the beginning of that whole move season. And top players who already knew move, who were in the world qualifier and already qualified, were like, oh, you just gave me more tools? Okay, let's have some real fun. And we just watched, as a caster, it's the best thing you can look for, is just constantly having things to talk about, because things are constantly moving on the board. It's a great experience for us. But at the same time, as a player, it's probably the most like mentally labor intensive deck to learn, because you're not just thinking during the turn how those moves are going to happen. You've got to think literally the entire game out starting from turn one. And a lot of people aren't used to doing that.
And when it comes down to it, you're always left with Heimdall 50-50, Juggernaut 50-50, and you're really playing like your odds. Because when you lose a 50-50, that is mentally taxing, because you can make the right decision, but if it doesn't play out correctly, there's a big game of variance, and your judgment will be tested. It's hard to make correct 50-50, 50-50, 40-60 read one after another, because it's optimal, right? But if you're being punished, it's like, oh, I might need to retreat more often than I have to, or I might win this in the long run, so let's play it out. But it's interesting to see, and I also think, like, I mean, no one wants to play Sizer. It's like those matchups where you're like, hey, early on, I'm dodging these move players because it is so taxing, but it's hard to imagine move not having its own place. And I think when Mercury used to be a 2-2, like, there was an answer, but now that kind of the best home for Mercury is, guess where? A move deck. Like, it's gonna be hard to find the right answers, and I think everyone was racking their brain when we look at the stats and we're like, oh, why is it so overwhelming? Like, all of us have been looking at Untapped for months at that point, right, Denish and Smlz? We were like, take a look at the top 10 cards. It was the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I wonder if that'll reflect going into kind of today's Golden Gauntlet that we'll like see in the Golden Gauntlet of 2026.
So one thing I want to catch on is that Worlds was really a full circle moment. At the start, the very first Golden Gauntlets was all about reallocating power. All of it. The most popular cards were move cards and bounce cards. Here and now, almost like all of the top cards are all move cards. And it's really just kind of showing like how valuable that ability to just move cards wherever you want is, whether it be on ladder, whether it be in conquest, but particularly in conquest, because of, again, that mental taxation. Like Xenaid said, you don't want to play Sizer. I don't want to play Sizer. I don't want to play Iris. I don't want to play these people that are moving 5 cards a turn, taking 5 minutes a game instead of 3. I want to go. I want to stay fresh. If you're not familiar with it, it can kind of like drag on. And this is why I don't like playing against move. I've played Stomper against Stomper on ladder for 4 months. It's draining. You just see it and it happens and it goes back and forth and you have to think, oh, what if they do this? There's so many little pieces that you could get wrong. You might forget a Batroc moves. You might forget that the Sam gets +2 power. Your opponent, who has been playing the deck for weeks and weeks, they know this and they're doing it. And it also capitalizes on you, the player's mistakes. You might have been playing for 5 hours and forgot Sam got a +2, and you were mathing the lane to win exactly by 1.
Yeah, it's also interesting looking at the fact that, like, when these move cards, I remember the conversations going into the Golden Gauntlet where it was always a contest for a lot of the upper players, at least to the conversations I was watching. You three can confirm this because you are said upper players. It was really simply 2 lines of thought. Do I play move or do I not? That's what the whole like workup to Worlds was, because it was just the dominant deck going into the week. And everyone was then also going on the other end of it. Okay, if that's the case, do I tech for it or do I tech for what they don't play? Because I think everybody's going to go the other way. And it was just this constant mental like exercise for the players trying to prepare for Worlds. And when you look at the cards that did best, like when you look at the cards that appeared the most, which of course, as always, are a variety of different tech cards, the only tech card that performed well was Cosmo, because almost all of the other tech cards couldn't handle prepping for that move the same way. Shadow King couldn't prepare for it the same way. Merlin couldn't prepare. Cosmic Ghost Rider did okay, but nowhere near close to as well as Cosmo. Alioth did about as good as Cosmic Ghost Rider, nowhere well as good as Cosmo. But you look at the cards that actually had the best win rates, it's all the move cards. And then neither make it into the final. What the hell?
Well, Spider-Punk did make it into the final in Worlds. It did. It wasn't Aeroshow.
Well, I mean,
Right,
speaking of that, let's transition to Worlds, right?
Yeah.
True.
So, one thing that I think the elephant in the room with all the move going on in Worlds is to address the Merkstone. What happened where a bug was discovered 4 hours before deck submission, that it was working inconsistently. And I know at like no fewer than like 3 or 4 people that were like, I am bringing ongoing. And it was something that did arguably have an effect. But in general, move was still the deck to beat. I don't know how much it affected it, but I do know that move, a lot of people were still planning on playing move for the event. And also stuff that happened that I also see here, Arishem, Thanos, Mockingbird, Valentina, what deck does that go in? Arishem. People were looking back to that Golden Gauntlet too, and that is a deck that did end up making the finals.
And it wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to. Like, after speaking to Teebs afterwards, it was literally like, I think, a last 10-minute or like last 5-minute decision because of what happened. And it was their comfort deck. They're like, look, I know this one. I'm going to play this deck out. And it did really well. Like, really, really well. Obviously, second place is nothing to sneeze at. So I find it interesting where you really, as much as you prepare for an event, for a tournament, for a certain pocket meta, and this is what, we talked to, getting ready for Golden Gauntlet for 2026, for this current meta, all of the new cards that have come on out. You think of what came out at that time, it was like, okay, we're in that move meta in the world final. It's a constant race in your head to figure out how many layers. It's like a chess match. How many layers deep do you want to go in your deck building? Do you want to make your deck decision on what's popular, or one tier down, or one tier down below that? It's like thinking about the Star-Lord decks right now, generally speaking. Do you tech for that? Or do you tech for playing against the Ronin deck? Or do you tech for the deck underneath that? And it's depending on where you place your deck construction psychology. I find it interesting because there's a lot we can learn from the world final as we progress also into going into 2026, because yes, a lot of cards have changed, but what happened during the world final is very relevant. And I think that's the biggest thing I would like players to really reflect on, is take it from the players who were in the world final last year and think back to the choices that needed to be made to prepare for that specific event. It's been, not 3 months. It's been 4 months of new content since that. Yes, there's a pocket meta, but you have to try to figure out from there the same way as they did back in November.
Yeah, and I do think that what you touched on there with the chess match of how deep do you want to go is one of the biggest parts. And I honestly think it's starting to break a little, because what you used to say is there was a dial where you can say, I'm going to do my own thing on this end. And then on the complete opposite end, I'm not doing my own thing at all. I'm stopping you from doing your thing. I think that that end has started to collapse a little. I don't think it's as much of an option, which means now people are not given the full scope of options. And so in this rock, paper, scissors environment, where paper is heavily nerfed and rock is not heavily nerfed, I almost wonder if there's going to be a deck found in the newest. I don't know if we want to move on to the newest Golden Gauntlet coming up yet, but is there going to be a deck found that actually counters Rock fully? Currently as Xiaolao, right? Or even like Star-Lord stuff. Star-Lord stuff isn't hard to counter, but you need a lot of very specific counters. And like I wouldn't personally be upset if a Star-Lord deck won, but realistically I don't see it happening. It's still going to be a deck that finds a balance. It's just I feel like the balance is it's going to be a new experience for sure. I'm not quite sure where the balance is going to fall.
All right. So, speaking of where the balance is going to fall, next Golden Gauntlets, the new meta, we'll see we're kind of in this rock, paper, scissors one right now, as Denish mentioned, where we have the Star-Lord that beats the Xiaolao, and the Xiaolao beats the Star-Lord counters, and the Star-Lord counters beat Star-Lord, obviously. So, with the OTA coming up and the nerfs to Star-Lord and Fin Fang Foom, and largely leaving Xiaolao untouched, what are we thinking about what could be a good angle into the meta? Because if Star Lord is going to go away, then all of a sudden Xiao Lao is kind of just beating up on everything. So do you think we're going to see, I know Xenaid alluded to it earlier, the Maverick on 5 and the Xiao Lao on 6? Or do you think we're going to see something from out of left field? Maybe a combo deck like Man Spider that Star-Lord was really keeping down start to see a large emergence again? Are we going to start to see different tech cards start to go up? Are the new cards releasing, like Iska the Unbeaten, going to have a major effect on this?
I can start off. I'm planning to bring Hela, obviously. This is the first time
No.
this is the first time I've ever had a Hela deck that can't just counter everything. I need to either choose to counter Stardust or Star Lord, and I don't really need to worry about the shallow stuff that much, to be honest. I have a plan for that. It's just points. But what's interesting is I either need to bring Enchantress Grandmaster, which sacrifices a lot of points, which means it's going to struggle into everything, and then be able to beat the Stardust decks, or I need to bring the Super Giant and possibly Eliath. I don't know. Eliath is not looking great. I might cut it and run something else. Not quite sure yet. But then I'll lose to Stardust. I'm curious if Stardust is even going to find a home in these decks, because Stardust doesn't really do anything against the good Shao decks, and it
Aurora.
doesn't really. What's up?
Aurora.
Sorry, Aurora. Yeah, the Aurora deck could run it, but I don't know if it should, right? Because like, name 3 people that are going to bring Hela. I think the Stardust deck, it does lose to it, but there's other ways to beat it. I don't know. I think that Hela is a really good angle into the meta bringing Supergiant. That's my opinion. And while that might be because of Supergiant more so than Hela, and we already touched a little bit on why, because Supergiant just kind of destroys everything. Mostly because it interferes with turn 5, which is pretty much the most important turn of the game. I think going with a large deck that dies to Stardust, or even Mobius, maybe negative, but I don't know. Negative kind of gets foomed. I don't know. I'll be bringing Hela, and I don't think it's the worst decision to go with a very big combo deck that isn't Star Lord.
I mean, I'll talk about my meta read because it's interesting because you do want to have 1 or 2 slots for answers. And like Dennis was talking about that. Hela, as a big ramp deck, has space for different answers than a normal Marvel Snap deck. You think about deck building in that regard. Hela gets like Enchantress, CGR, stuff like that, Sugi. But they don't run like the small stuff. Like when Shadow King was the 2-3, not really, right? Because it's harder to fit in their curve, it's harder to use those cards more effectively. And we were talking about how tech cards go into specific shells now. And it's like The Sleeping Giants deck, I believe, currently is Cerebro. Like, Cerebro will show up in glorious ways after the Magus buff into a 2/3. If Cerebro's in the deck, you float 3 mana, you get Cerebro on the board. Like, you have a plan when you don't draw Cerebro. You can now bluff Cerebro being in your deck, and there's like 27 points per lane. Like, if you think about like the numbers in that regard, it's actually pretty hard. Also, Heart of the Cards fan of the podcast, a friend of the podcast, we were discussing C4. Cerebro 4 gets to do the Mercury, gets to do the Prodigy, gets to do Invisible Woman Shadow King. And with the rise of Cerebro comes me playing 50 games on ladder every 2 hours, because there is nothing I enjoy more than beating Cerebro players. But it is an answer that people have to think about. With Cerebro comes back Sauron. With Sauron, like, that's cope. But but if Cerebro does show play, Sauron will see play. The question is, do these decks stand up to the SL meta tyrants, Star-Lord and Xiao Lao? Although it is of my opinion that Star-Lord has lost too many points, and if you are confidently able to Red Guardian a Star-Lord, that deck is not going to be good enough. Red Guardian is the tech card I want to point out because it does have fair matchups into the non-Sam Wilson games that the Craven deck runs. The Batrock, Red Guardian also is a good match for Xiao Lao. If you're playing the Merlin versions of the deck, Red Guardian is the best polymorph target like in the game. I think it is so good as a polymorph target. And then if people decide to run discard, if people decide to run random stuff like V-Hand, Red Guardian will be my MVP, and I believe people should be using it in the next Golden Gauntlet.
Cerebro 3. That's my recommendation, because that deck seems crazy with 2/3 mages. So Cerebro 3 has already won the World Championship, so it's already proven that it can be a very strong deck. And now you're eradicating the biggest weakness from the deck, as in, oh, I didn't draw my Cerebro. Mages said you did. I think that Mage's Cerebro 3 is going to be extremely strong, to the point where I'm considering joining Xenaid on Sauron Island and running Red Skull on ladder, because I hate Cerebro so much. I'll kick it over to guests now.
What a world we live in. Because even though Star-Lord is a deck to consider, it's a deck that can be controlled, and I think that the decks that will perform best will already have factored that in. So I don't think Star-Lord is a solution for a lot of people if they want to succeed in the Golden Gauntlet and they want to guarantee their spot and get the 5-1 and get into the World Final. The Xiao Lao players have a much better shot. Absolutely. I think that the overall best, I'm not sure what to bring deck, the answer is something Xiao Lao. Really, it could be almost anything Xiao Lao. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if people brought the Destroy Xiao Lao deck just because they can. I wouldn't recommend it versus others, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them in this event. I think that it has, out of the meta tyrants, the best chance to make it into the final. With that said, I hate that you took my point about Red Guardian, because I 100% want to shout out both Red Guardian and bringing back Deafening Chord in some capacity, because the ability to hit that Maverick on the final turn with priority is probably going to be the name of the game for moving past the Xiao Lao decks. And I think it's easier to do with Deafening Chord, but more often, if you can just figure out how to sacrifice that other 3 power and not have to worry about it, that other 3 energy and not have to worry about it, so that way you can play a Red Guardian on 6, because you have to have priority to do so, and you've got to get it right? You got to get it just perfectly, and most likely it's going to be the lowest card in that lane at that time, more often than not. I think that there's a world where we see Deafening Chord make a rise in this event, which is going to stink, because then you're going to see it on ladder where it will not perform as well. And I'm going to put it out there. I am not drinking the Kool-Aid. I am simply saying that the solution to all of this is Wasp. And play Sholau Wasp in any way, and you're going to win the Golden Gauntlet. Tell you that right now, that's my stake. I'm putting that out there now. Sholau Wasp. I believe in it. I've climbed with it. I'm not a climber. Let me be clear. I hit Infinite, but I am not a climber. And I have climbed this season. And it very much so was Sholau Wasp.
Before Denish speaks, you said Sholau, and any word after that kind of does not count. I climbed with Sholau. What did you say?
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm so jealous. I can't run Sholau. I don't play enough cards. I am almost wondering, because now that you've mentioned Magus in Cerebro specifically, does that deck run Luke Cage?
They will be running Luke Cage, and Red Guardian does hit the Luke Cage.
But I'm trying to think how many 3-drops are in that deck at that point, because Cerebro runs a lot of 3-drops that they want. Or Magus. They obviously want the security that you're going to get the hit. It looks like Smlz has just listed 4: Cosmos, Cerebro, Mystique, Cage. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just trying to think of other ways to counterplay. The biggest one I was thinking of is Silver Samurai, but even then, because what ends up happening is they just don't draw it and you have the leech problem. So yeah, I'm now very, very concerned about Cerebro, and we'll be thinking that over for the next week.
Yeah, I think Cerebro might really start to take off again. And that is scary, personally, because it is my least favorite deck to play against. Though I hope Xenaid can keep it in tech on ladder. So although it might definitely be the most popular deck, in the deck that if I was going, like, I need to win, I would take probably C3, just because, one, it's proven, and two, it's getting a lot more consistent, which was the biggest issue with the deck. I do think that in general, is it going to be healthy? I'm not sure. Is it going to be good? Yeah. I also think that Supergiant is another good counter, as I also expect to see end of turn decks pop back up again with Invisible Woman First Steps, because of the ability to go Thena plus Iska on turn 6 with multiple Invisible Woman First Steps triggers, getting you a 2/12 in Thena and a 4 win a lane with Iska.
Where are we at for generic good cards? Because I think there's always some weight in Valentina, there's weight in Iron Patriot, there's weight in Legion. All these cards, when you bring it to a tournament setting, I don't recall them being very winning, -1 Arishem wins, but these cards make the experience of getting 5-1 a whole lot easier. Because matchups where you have no ounce to win, you can leverage the power of the variants here and scam. And skill diff is basically what we call it, the skill diff decks.
Yeah, I think with Iron, you bring up a good point specifically with Iron Patriot, where we talked earlier about that imbalance of information, trying to figure out what can you do that your opponent can't in an open deck list format. And it was regularly a top 5, top 10 card, Iron Patriot, in win rate, as well as doing well in appearance rate. And it's just a good catch-all where if you're not sure, just throw in an Iron Patriot. We used to be that way with Merlin. And Merlin was definitely that card in the past. And you're going to look at past results and say, wow, Merlin was in like roughly 20% of decks throughout every single qualifier. And now he's barely in 10% of your games on ladder. And for that exact reason, because he was so prominent then and he's less prominent now, I'm going to put a wild call out there that there is a hidden value that needs to be revisited in Magic, because Legion is making some appearances, but in an open decklist format, there's no surprise there. When you're playing Magic in an open decklist format, even without playing the card, you're getting into turn 5 and you're still trying to factor in, I need to have 2 winning conditions here for a 6, or are they playing this on 5 and now I have to factor in for a 7? And I think that indecision of what are you actually doing because of Magic, and the lack of responses to turning Magic off that the current meta is playing into, I think that's something that could propose a lot of value in the competitive scene. And I would not be surprised if we saw different variations of throwing Magic into not just combo decks, but even as utilizing it like a tech card, like we kind of started to do a little bit with these Star-Lord counters playing Magic on 5. I see the exact same value, just generically speaking here. And I'd be curious to see if that actually holds true, even in a Cerebro meta.
Right. With the Magic situation, Honifer, one of our top player friends, he made a Star-Lord deck with Magic in it. And when asked what to do in a bad matchup, he's just like, you play Magic when it's good, you don't when it's not against Star-Lord or Shallow Badrock. Sometimes they run out of fuel. And another really good Magic deck that was touched less by the OTA with the Star-Lord is High Evo, where you get those extra turns, you get extra value for the end of turn effects, and then you do Star-Lord into Fing Fang Foom Juggernaut. I've been hit with that multiple times on ladder, and it's really disgusting because you get Fing Fang Foomed in their lane with like a 20 power Sunspot, or like their Cyclops ate your whole lane like over and over. Like, you got no power. Juggernaut does what Juggernaut does. He goes where he wishes. And then your Fing Fang Foom cleans up everything. There are a lot of interesting kind of meta calls for where this Golden Gauntlet is going to go. And I think we are a little bit spoiled for choice as long as we ignore the Xiao Lao, a giant dragon, elephant in the room.
All right. I think that probably wraps up about our discussion on the new meta. One quick last point that I want to touch on, Rocket and Groot going to a 3/3. I think that card, we talked about good generic cards. We talked about Super Giant. That's a deck that really wants Prio. I think Rocket and Groot is a real contender for one of the cards that you could see played a lot after it goes back to that 3/3 stat line. I mean, it is the best Iron Patriot follow up, or at least one of like the top 3. It has you can move it. I also think it goes into that Stomper Xiao Lao deck. So I think that deck is actually going to get buffed. And yeah, so real quick, everyone, let's predict the highest win rate and most played card. I think that the most played card is going to be Cosmo, and the highest win rate card is going to be, let's say, I'll go a little bit spicy. I'll say the 2/3 Magus is going to be the highest win rate card, the newly buffed.
I've grabbed my Cosmo because I agree with you. I've grabbed my taxi, put him in my lap, and yeah, I agree. Cosmo is going to be the most played card, without a hesitation. I'm going to take it a step further and say it's going to be a 38% play rate. I'm going right on 38. That is my prediction for Cosmo, and I got that because Taxi told me it. So if I'm wrong, it's actually my dog's fault. It's not mine. He has the insider information on the dogs, so I'm just going with him. But in regards to highest win rate, it's going to be a deck that obviously is going to have to make it into the top 16, has extra games, and is affecting the win rates. And based on our conversations that we've had here, it's really tough to figure out which card is going to have the highest win rate, but I'm going to put my money on Scarlet Witch.
A gamer special. I think Cosmo is the highest played card. I don't think there's contest there. If I had to put another card in the ring, I would say Maverick, but like those cards are both pretty good. Cosmo's just, I think, way up there. The only concern I bring, Sauron doesn't run Cosmo, you guys. If everyone's predicting Cerebro, then That's going to drag the play rate down. For the most
Scarlet
winning
Witch.
card, I'm going to just try to bless some players that I'm really rooting for. And so I'm going to call out my prediction guess, Gambit, most winning card. You'll see Phantom X, you'll see Hella. I think Gambit might terrorize some Golden Gauntlets. It's the year of the Gambit.
We can't. Gambit can't win a tournament. It's gonna get nerfed. We can't have it happen. It's not
No.
allowed. I'm gonna just disagree for the fun of it. I'm gonna say Cosmo's not the most played card. I'm gonna pick a different card. I'm gonna say Xiaolao. I don't think people are gonna pick up on the Cerebro stuff as much as we might, and I think especially because Golden Gauntlet caters to a lot more of the less integrated audience of Marvel Snap. I think we're gonna see a lot more of the old stuff, not Star-Lord, new, nerfed, but more so Xiaolao because it kind of wasn't. And even though it's a little bit harder to pick up on those play lines, I think it's gonna be probably, even though I think that deck runs Cosmo, so I might just be being
Yeah, it does run Cosmo, by the way.
It does.
But
also Cerebro also runs Cosmo.
Just saying.
I just want to be different, man. And most winning card, I think this one's interesting because it's not the best one. It's just kind of a niche one that some guy does really well with. I think I'll go with
Uatu.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find a Sauron card that goes in a different deck that is also good. So I'm gonna say
Good luck,
Nightmare. Nightmare is going to be the most winning card of Golden Gauntlet.
So we all agree on Cosmo, except the contrarian who thinks it's going to be Xiaolao. And 4 different choices for the highest win rate card. I've got Magus, Gastus got Scarlet Witch, Zen's got Gambit, and Denish has Nightmare for some reason. We'll see if any of us turn out right, though I do think Cosmo is going to be very strong, at least. And quickly, before we wrap up, we're going to be talking about the location of the week, which I just have as Asgard. So one thing I wanted to touch on mainly is with the OTA. I mentioned it earlier. Rocket and Groot. We mentioned Iron Patriot earlier. How impactful, and we mentioned Supergiant. I really bring this up to talk about priority. How important do you think having priority in hitting, like we talked about Red Guardian with priority hitting the Maverick or a Deafening Chord? How important do you think priority is going to be in this upcoming Golden Gauntlet?
Really, really important. I think that is probably the biggest name of the game going into this event, because we talked about Supergiant. We talked about Red Guardian. We talked about how to counter Xiaolao. We're talking about these move decks. We're talking about every card that wants to have a counter has to have priority right now. This is not a let Juggernaut do its thing meta. This is not a, like, I would take that out of every deck and I would put a Negasonic over it, for example, right? I would basically say it's not necessary. It really isn't a priority game. It is a priority half a game. You're really only trying to play priority the first 4 turns. If you can do that, unless you're facing Xiaolao and then it is the first 5, I really think you can switch it on the final turn and still win, to be completely honest. Like, having that be a game plan, having priority through the first 4, knowing what the counter meta is most likely going to be, I think that's kind of the name of the game right now. You have to be pushing priority. These bigger cards, playing cards on 1, 2, and 3 do hold value. This isn't a just skip it and let it float meta for this tournament. This is definitely get the cards, get the points, get them on the damn board.
I believe one of us is pretty good at priority gaming. And it is very important when you think about Iron Patriot, those higher variance cards, to get those win that lane, you know? Even just in a conquest format to bully people out of the game. If you look like you're winning, you don't need to get to turn 6. people will lose. You want to get into a favorable position. Unfortunately, as a priority gamer, I do have to ask you guys to remember what is the best turn one into the best turn two in this metagame. I'll give you a hint. You don't have to build your deck for priority. It's already one of the best decks in the game. Turn one, Batroc, into turn two, Sam, and you got priority as much as you'd like.
Yeah, I do think priority is very important. To touch on the location for Asgard specifically, Asgard is a very cool location to get priority around. What I've found is for Asgard, you don't really need to play into it the first 2 turns. You can usually just win it with a 4 cost if you have a big one, unless your opponent is Batroc, and then you just kind of have to give it up. Um, what's cool is Asgard is one of these locations that cares about turn 4, which means going into turn 5, you have to look at what your previous board state was turn 4. And so what you can do to get priority a lot of the time, people will commit really hard to get the draw because draw is obviously very good. And so if you split your power in the other 2 lanes, most of the time you'll be able to get that priority that you need for turn 5. And so if you determine you're in a matchup where it's like, okay, they can draw their combo, but if I have my priority for turn 5 to Cosmo them, then I know one of the 2 lanes they're going to be playing in. That is definitely one thing with Asgard. Keep in mind that draw is not always the most important thing. Sometimes you need to keep in mind priority. Zen, do you want to touch on specifically mind control stuff with Asgard for
Yep, it's a mind control location. It is a giga mind control location. People will be going for the plus draw, but I think the hallmark of a good player is knowing when they have what they need in their hand to win. So this is not just Asgard, but you think about Lechigia, you think about Vibranium Mines, the things that dilute your deck or affect the cards you have in the game. If you don't need more cards, then you don't care about Asgard. If you're V-Hand, you don't care about Asgard. If you're Cerebro and they are not playing for Asgard, and they're just completely ignoring it, guess what? They probably have Cerebro in hand. So you think you're going to snap on Asgard, you die to a Cerebro. Things like that are actually really important. And it's less about the mind control, but also about the reads. If a player ignores Asgard, you run. Because if a Shallow player ignores Asgard, guess what they got in their hand? Right? These things are things that you want to kind of be able to do to read the flow of the game, because the way people play around these priority locations is really important, right? It's like, oh, if you recognize that you need priority elsewhere or you have a good enough hand to win, you got a plan. Well, it better be better than their plan, because if drawing 2 cards doesn't help you enough to win that game and you snap on Asgard, you are getting mind controlled.
The mind control is interesting with this too, because like I look at Asgard the same way I do like Baxter building, where the second it appears on the board, you're making a decision of, am I trying to win that specific lane, not just compete to get the effect, but am I trying to win that lane also? Or am I just completely throwing it and already starting to invest everything else in the other 2 lanes? I play that mind game with Baxter building all the time, and I do it with Asgard just as equally. And there's the other one that's like Baxter building light. I always forget which one that is.
The Crown.
Crown City?
Crown City, that one. But you know which. The fact I called it Baxter building light and you knew what I meant, that's all that mattered. So that one. But it's the same idea where there is a lot of these locations that ask you to commit, and you have to figure out very quickly, do you need to throughout the entire game? Because I think it's irresponsible to look at an Asgard and say, oh, I'm just going to win it for turn 4 and then not compete for it. I think you're making a statement when you're also competing for it that I am competing and defending. So there's a lot to read in those types of locations. And if you, very similar to what Zen was going on, if they're intentionally throwing it, please identify what deck they have, because chances are they have everything they already need, and be ready for that combo, because it's a higher percentage chance that they have the combo versus I need to draw. It's like when you see Nico use the destroy spell to draw 2 cards. They're not doing it to get the destroy proc off of death. You know, they're trying to get the Deadpool finally out of their deck that they never pulled. Like, that's the kind of stuff you got to pay attention to. And Asgard works exactly the same way.
Yeah, and one last thing for Asgard before I send it to Smlz to wrap. We for these location of the week cards, we love to talk about the location tech cards that we have, the Scarlet Witch, the Merlin, the Legion. I don't think that Quake or Legion really apply to Asgard in any way that's interesting. Obviously, Juggernaut also. Wow, another location where Juggernaut's good. This card needs to be changed. But what I think is interesting is Merlin and Scarlet Witch, because obviously with Quake, it's like, oh, you move it and then you win it. Like, sure, obviously. But with Merlin and and Scarlet Witch and even Snowguard, I guess, what's interesting is what turn you actually want to turn it off. Because what ends up happening is the opponent, a lot of the time, will commit a lot of points into Asgard from turns 1 through 4 and leave the board almost filled, which means their board structure at the end of the game is going to probably either be one tall lane, two small lanes, or two tall lanes with one card that you have to play around in the Asgard lane late. So, and it might just be a 6 power shell body, where it's just like, okay, I know about how much power there is here. I just need to be able to beat the other lanes. That's how I find turning it off works, is you want to do it late. Zen, can you talk on when the opponent plays a Merlin? How hard do you typically commit to the Asgard?
Against Merlin, you do not want the Merlin deck to win Asgard, because Merlin's kind of thing is if they get a certain sequence of spells, specifically once in future, you're shuffling cards, and the kind of downside of that is you're shuffling cards back in, you know? But when you draw those cards again, and usually they're like low cost enablers, right? Like they draw another hood, they get another demon. Like they're playing around the downside of their once and future as well. And it's like, hey, this is really dangerous for me. Because the Merlin deck that runs Hood Misery, you know, they're playing all those cards out. They get to dump their hand if they're winning Asgard, and you're just in such a more losing position. So I think more or less it's not really how you play around Asgard, it's how you react to your opponent's snap. And everything we've talked about so far is information that you should be using because Asgard is one of those snappable locations.
One more thing I want to touch on. We mentioned cards that are like specifically good with the location. So we always talk about Asgard. There's typically a heavy battle. Like it's going to be one of the taller lanes because a lot of players commit turns 1 to 4 to that. A card that's really good at your opponent really goes hard to win one lane early. Professor X. You can lock down a lane, and instead of that lane, maybe you need to have like 8 points in it to win. Now you might only need like 6 points or 4 points. Maybe like Hydra Bob plus Professor X just wins a lane because they didn't play anything in it. So, in general, I think that you're looking at cards that can maybe benefit from not going all the way. Like Galactus is another one. You wave on 3, your opponent's committed their first 3 turns there. Now it's just like a 50-50 at best, even if they have 6 power, or else the Galactus is coming down and they're just going to lose. I think Asgard really kind of favors the other 2 locations if you already have what you need. So, like, for example, if your opponent's going really early and committing their entire early game, so they only have 2 turns to play for 2 lanes, whereas you've been playing for those other lanes the whole game because you already had everything you needed, it is a massive, massive advantage for you. With that, it concludes our episode. So, before I do the quick reading of all the channels, I'm going to kick it to Guest, who has a podcast they would like to talk about and a few channels. Guest, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, for those who do not know, if you've made it, through this episode of this podcast, and you like hearing more things about the world of Marvel Snap, I also have a podcast with KM Best. That is the Marvel Snapcast, and you can come join us and come hang out. It is its own YouTube channel at Marvel Snapcast. But if you just like me and you don't want to say hi to KM, I get that too. That's fine. Nothing against you, KM. We love you, man. But if you want to just come hang out over on the guest list, you're more than welcome to as well at twitch.tv or youtube.com or x.com or Instagram or TikTok or all of the places. It's all the same thing. It's Guest Gaming. So come join us. Come hang out. We talk serious, but we don't take ourselves seriously. I am never going to be in the ranks of these gentlemen. You will never see me in the top 1,000. I am at the highest rank I've ever been in my life, and I haven't even cracked 2K. Barely. But I know I can talk Marvel Snap. I know I have, and I've been honored to be here talking competitive Marvel Snap and the analysis and everything that I've seen and learned and studied over being, one of the creators and organizers for the Golden Gauntlet. And if you like this conversation and you want to join that community as well, signups are going to be happening, I believe, on the day that this podcast episode releases. So keep an eye out because the sign up link will be out for about 5 days or so. And the event happens on Saturday, March 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have any questions, ask any of the amazing people here on this podcast. I guarantee you somebody knows the answer. And when they don't, they'll come ask me anyway.
Thank you for that, guest. We have, now I'll talk about us a bit. Denish, you can find him at twitch.tv/Denish_Hella. Me, you can find me at youtube.com/@SnapAcademyYT. And Xenaid, you can find at twitch.tv/XenaidDFT, where he takes himself very seriously and totally doesn't jam Sauron into the worst decks you can see. Discord link is in the description. Make sure to follow guest. Have a great one, y'all. Peace.